I bought a piece of land, which is about 100,000 square feet. We could put about 280 units on it normally, if we respect zoning laws. Now, through everything that we do, everything that we've shown the city, we go to the city and say, look, we think we should be able to put 900 units on this land. Why? Because if you allow us to do that, this is what we're going to be able to do for families, for elderly people, for homeless people, for the city in general. It's not going to cost you, the city, anything.
Have you been thinking about buying your first rental property for some time, or do you already own a bunch of properties? Well, fellow investors, you found the right location to listen and learn from others' successes. Welcome to The Very Real Estate Effect with your host, Axel Monsagne.
Hello, and welcome back to The Very Real Estate Effect podcast, a show dedicated to real estate investing right here in Quebec. Today, it's a pleasure and an honor, actually today, this week, to have as a guest Mr. Nikolay Ray, the founder of MREX, founder of Fierbrooke, a big real estate investment firm in Sherbrooke. Nikolay basically doesn't need to be introduced because unless you've been hiding under a rock, you've already heard about him. So Nikolay, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Axel. Thanks for having me.
So it's a pleasure to be here. Before we get into it, everybody who's listening, share this episode with a friend who could benefit from this conversation because Nikolay is going to help us. He's going to educate us a little bit. Somewhat, quite a lot, and it's going to be worth sharing for people who are interested in real estate investing. So, Nikolay, as I said just before we got on, I'm really happy that you're here because I've looked up to you. You intimidated me a little bit because I thought you had a big mouth and you're ballsy, and I was kind of like, oh my God, this guy is. He's doing big things.
And I'm built like a Mack truck as well.
And you're built like a mad truck, but look, you fit in the chair.
Yeah,
it goes well,
it's all
man.
good.
So you've had a big evolution over the last 10 or 15 years. I'd like to go back a little bit at the very beginning when you started with, I think, a sixplex or a small multifamily in Sherbrooke.
I actually started as more in the investment banking side, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
So I built up a firm called Ray Harvey,
okay,
which still exists today, that I sold in 2016.
Very good.
And essentially, we were offering discretionary advice to very wealthy real estate investors.
Okay.
We would also do brokerage services, private lending, real estate analysis, econometric modeling, all the math side of things. Mm-hmm. And that's how I got started in real estate, other than being more of like a passive investor.
Okay. And
then in 2019, I decided to apply everything that I'd done for everyone else for myself. Go. Being in business for now almost 18 years, obviously when you build businesses, you build a lot of wealth, but it's very intangible and it can fluctuate. Yeah. So I was like, okay, I have kids. I'll always be an entrepreneur. I'm obviously a real estate professional and I want to hedge kind of my risk. Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to, I'd been out of the real estate game, like on like actually boots on the ground, out of it for a couple of years because I'd founded the MREX College and sold Ray Harvey. And I was starting to feel like I was becoming one of those kind of professors that is, that doesn't have his finger on the market. So I was like, okay, I need to also start buying properties to go back into the lab and be even more coherent in what I'm teaching at MREX College, and also continue to evolve the thought processes and what it is that I have to teach to other investors. Yeah. Because I'm very big on sharing. My whole life has been around sharing. I grew up with parents that were, artists and grew up in Los Angeles despite being a half Quebecer, and, grew up with a mentality of to live a wealthy life is to actually help others and to share with other people. Mm-hmm. So, First apartment building in Sherbrooke was a 7-unit that we completely rebuilt, put about 125 a door in renovations.
Full gut, full strip.
Did that another 25 times in 2 years.
Yeah. Wow.
And
you have a good team to do that 25 times in 2 years.
Yeah, good team. I like stress. Yeah. I like having pressure, and that evolved into what it is today. We essentially bought 40 properties in 28 months.
Wow.
And then gutted 25 of those. Mm-hmm.
So, do you own the construction company as well?
At first, we hired an outside contractor. Yeah. That didn't go too well. We actually had to sue him. Yeah. So now we are our own GC. We can better control things. Same thing with property management. Mm-hmm. So we're fully integrated. And now we own over 50 properties in Sherbrooke.
Wow.
We have about 2,500 units in the pipeline to build.
2,500?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's go talk about that after.
And we have about 400 already up and running with tenants in them, and we're acquiring another 300 to 500 probably this year to stack on to that. So we're kind of a hybrid where what we do is we do optimization, value add.
Mm-hmm.
We also do a lot of stuff that we just buy and sit on it, keep it as affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
And we hedge our portfolio of development with those types of properties because we never sell anything and we'll never ever sell anything. We're a perpetual holding company essentially.
Mm-hmm.
My idol is Warren Buffett, and I'm trying to recreate kind of what he's done with Berkshire Hathaway for himself and his family, his partners, and his investors. I'm trying to recreate that same thing in real estate. So
there's been an evolution,
Yeah.
as you said, in terms of acquiring, used and optimizing it. So full renovation, re-renting at market rent, and keeping as affordable. And then you also evolved to develop, and those are
Right.
two very different processes. So you bought land in Sherbrooke, and what are you working on now?
So it's mostly redevelopment and urban development. So I focus like when we went into Sherbrooke, the idea was number one to be in a blue ocean strategy. So I didn't come to Montreal or Quebec City, even though I'm originally from Quebec City. But I wanted to go somewhere where the amount of money that we had at that moment would make a big dent in the universe.
It would buy you more.
And I knew that in Montreal, it wouldn't make that big of a dent. Quebec City, neither. So I was looking at secondary markets, and I apply a monopoly strategy. I ended up being in the newspapers a lot because of that. It was taken out of context, but the idea behind the monopoly strategy is to enter massively into a very niche market and to de-risk yourself by not waiting for that market to get better, but to actually be an important factor in its revitalization because you own so many properties and essentially you own the worst properties. So that's what we did. We bought like the 30 worst properties in downtown Sherbrooke. And so look, we're going to rebuild these, or we're going to tear them down and build something better. And following kind of like the broken window theory of, it only takes one broken window to screw up a neighborhood.
Yeah.
Well, we were applying the opposite. So we bought everything with broken windows and then fixed everything with the hopes of bringing back some pride to the downtown center of Sherbrooke, which is the downtown's the heart of a city, right? It has to be eclectic. There's poverty, there's wealth, there's artists, there's professionals, but it can't be all poor, because if it's all poor and all run down, it's like having a bad heart. You can have a really good body, but then the rest of your body
doesn't work.
It doesn't work, exactly. No. So that's essentially what we did. And when we enter other markets, that'll be the same thing. When we enter another market, it'll be massively with a lot of acquisitions, a lot of volume, in a very strict square footage of the city. And everything we do is focused on affordable housing, sustainable development, and community reinvestment. So we consider ourselves as impact investors, where it's not just a financial bottom line. It has to be there, right? Because otherwise, the basis of what we do doesn't work. Capitalism doesn't work. But it's more in the vein of conscious capitalism, or Asian people would call it Confucianism.
How do you impact the city? What kind of contribution do you make?
Exactly.
And I'm glad you're bringing up this topic, because sometimes I find so many people remove this and they look at their internal rate of return, and they're happy with it. And it's like, okay, but what did you really contribute to the city other than you making more money?
And that's fine. I mean, I'm not one to judge if that's what your end game is. That's fine. And there are plenty of.
But I think we can do more, and we can do better.
I think we need people. I mean, the system is built on wealth creation. Other than that, though, I think we all have a choice of how we live our lives and how we run our businesses. And for me, it was just, you know what? I mean, I didn't want to be poor. I grew up quite poor, around a lot of wealth, because Los Angeles is
the two extremes.
Is the two extremes. And my parents were poor artists, but my mom's friends were very wealthy. So I saw kind of the both of those worlds. And I didn't want to be poor, but at the same token, once I got to a place where I wasn't poor, and I knew that I'd never be poor just because of my talents and the personality that I have and the contribution that I can create, I was like, okay, well, what's next? I mean, this is all fun and this is nice, having this money and this wealth and the capacity to continue on generating wealth. But what's next? Is that all my life is going to be? And I grew up, I'm multi-ethnic. I was born in Quebec. My mom's French Canadian. Obviously with, a bit of...
Father's American?
My father was half Indian from Bengal, from the northeast of India. So grew up with Buddhism and a lot of the Eastern philosophies.
Yeah.
And he was also half British.
Okay.
And he actually grew up in the UK. So, and I grew up in Los Angeles, just to make things even more messed up. So
that's a very interesting mix, to say the least.
Yeah, no, but it made it so that I was always, I guess I was kind of built by my childhood as the importance of living a good life and it being worth something, and having meaning.
Yeah, and it's a huge motivator, because it's years later that you realize certain things, maybe in your early childhood in Los Angeles, how it impacted you here, and how it's driven some of the decisions that you've made years later, if not decades.
Well, I'm in real estate because of something that I went through when I was about 7 years old. So as a child, my weekends would be playing with Legos in my bedroom with no plans, like actually building my own cities. Stuff. Right. Yeah. And then when SimCity came out on, like, I don't know if it was a Nintendo or the computer or whatnot, that was like my religion, right? SimCity, building cities, and then Age of Empires, Civilization, whatnot. And when I was about 7 years old, I think I was in second grade, my teacher, Mrs. Santana, had given us a homework. And the homework was to do, I guess, an expose on what we wanted to become as an adult. Like, did you want to become a firefighter or a policeman? And, I was an illegal immigrant in the U.S. in the late 80s, early 90s with my parents, because that's what it was back then, right? And so I couldn't be the president of the U.S. I couldn't be a firefighter or a cop. I couldn't be a Navy SEAL. So none of those cool professions, like, they were all out. I was this brown illegal immigrant French Canadian kid, but that didn't speak French. So I was like, okay, you
were naturally excluded from a lot of those
exactly things. I'm kind of screwed. So we were walking, we went to downtown LA to brunch on a Sunday. And if you've ever been to LA, like, you're in downtown and there's skyscrapers and expensive condos
but it's empty on the weekend.
Good restaurants, but it's empty, and next to it is Skid Row. And Skid Row is about a mile and a half, about a mile and a half by a mile and a half of just desolation. It's right. It's 50,000
poverty and drugs.
It's 50,000 people living in the streets in tents. Yeah. And as a 7-year-old, I was like, whoa, what's that? Like, and we parked right next to Skid Row because it's there. And so my parents explained to me what Skid Row was, and then obviously the whole concept of poverty and whatnot. And even though we were poor, I had two parents. Like, contrary to most kids in LA in the rough neighborhoods, my dad wasn't in jail, and my parents loved me, and we had something to eat, even though we lived in shitty apartment buildings with cockroaches. Yeah. I didn't know we were poor at that age, and then I saw that, which was like, whoa, that's just crazy. And I said to my parents, oh, I know what I'm going to present in class and what I'm going to do when I'm going to be older. So I pointed to one of the skyscrapers that you can see from there, because in my mind at that age, a skyscraper was a company. So I said, I'm going to have a company like that one, and we're going to build buildings and homes to get the people off the streets, so they don't have to live like that. And my parents being who they were, my dad was a jazz musician. He was much like a Buddhist monk, kind of a sage or a philosopher. Yeah. My mom was a theater actress, life of the party, but one of the most caring people you can meet. Very, very compassionate. She should have lived in a hippie commune, rather than society. And they were just like, you know what? That's great. If you want to do that, do that. You can do that.
Go for it.
Go for it. And that always stayed in the back of my mind throughout life. I became a professional hockey player. I went to the Olympics. I studied biomechanics. And then I ended up bifurcating back to real estate in my mid to late 20s. But everything that I was always doing, I always kind of had that in the back of my mind of like, I need to find a way one day to realize that in my life.
Okay, I just want to pause and take 3 seconds to reflect on how what you just shared, everything that you did got you to that moment to be able to do this. In this case, it's in Sherbrooke.
Right.
And it's amazing how we don't realize, but we've been conditioned 20 years ago with all those little steps, whether, it was going on that brunch or in Skid Row, whether it was then the sports involvement, the professional choices that you've made to take you to that point for then to be like, oh, this is exactly where I should be to do this right now. That's amazing.
Yeah. it's crazy because it was actually a year and a half ago. Me and so I started Fierbrooke, which means bringing pride back to Sherbrooke.
Being proud
right.
of
Right.
that investment.
It's a play of words, right? And my business partner, who one of my really good friends, Fred, who's a radiologist, we started together. So obviously he put in the money and he put in, emotional support. I put in money and I did all the work, or a lot of it with the team. And so I said to Fred, look, we've been through about 4 years now of building this business. We have over 40 properties. We have, at that moment, we had over 50 million in assets. But we had done it through COVID, through the lockdowns, through the price increases, through no one wanting to work in construction because everyone was so busy. Then interest rates jumped historically. Then the CMHAC blocked anything that had private lending on it. So if you're doing value add and development, it's like, well, that's everything, right?
The brakes on.
Exactly. And, we got to the point where we're like, okay, let's take a breather and kind of go from there and see what we want to keep on doing. Because we were at the point where we were buying a property every week. And it was just like, it was kind of I was starting to feel numb. Okay. And I said to a friend, look, I'm going to model, because my background's in financial engineering. That's what I teach at MREX College. I teach at the real estate investors. And I said, look, I'll model our portfolio. Let's say we don't buy anything for the next 25 years. We were 39 at that time. So let's say when we're 64, what does this look like? We don't make another acquisition ever. We start deleveraging everything and kind of do it the old way of trying to not have any mortgages, which financially I would never teach anyone to do. I think it's probably one of the worst decisions other than a preference. And I was like, let's do that and generate the least amount of returns possible. And what would this look like? So the model came out with, $260 million in assets at 64 without making another acquisition, $44 million in loans that would still be left to pay off. So we'd have about 216 million net to split between the two of us before taxes, right? And we're looking at each other like, that's just ridiculous. Like
how much more do we need?
Like we already make a decent living each other like each year. We already have everything we want. We're both guys that don't really want that much. Like I like luxury like anyone. I don't need it. No. I'm happy wearing a sweatshirt and flip-flops and not having a $50,000 watch on my wrist. I can put one on, but I don't need one. Yeah. I like traveling with my 4 kids and showing them the world. I like going to restaurants, but other than that, I don't have any crazy wants,
aspirations, luxury, and all this.
No, not really. And I'm kind of more nomadic. So like having all these houses in the world and a jet and all this stuff, it's like too much. Like
it's a lot of maintenance too.
I had like 6 cars at one point because I really love cars because I grew up in LA in car culture. And I just sold them all. I was like, I don't have time to take care of this stuff. Like you need staff to do this.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
A part-time job just managing the fleet.
Exactly. And that's when we looked at each other like, okay, like what's going to make us want to get up in the morning and keep on doing this?
Is that the pivot moment?
That's the pivot moment. And that's where I was like, okay, number one, we're going to go even further into this impact investing thing. We were already doing it, but let's really go all into it. And secondly, let's also open up what we do to other investors. Because at that point, it was just us.
It was just two of
We had 2 or 3 friends who put a bit of money later on with us, but it was just us. We weren't syndicating. We weren't a fund. It was just private family company.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of people around us who was like, hey, we'd really like to invest with you guys. And I even had students at MREX. And I always kept kind of like a Chinese wall between my stuff and MREX because I wanted to make sure that if you come to MREX, we teach you how to invest.
It could be seen as a conflict of interest.
I'm not there as a predator to get you to invest in my deals.
It's not a fundraising strategy.
Exactly. It's zero. No. But a lot of people challenge me on that because they're like, hey, we've invested all this money to learn how to invest at MREX. We're going to put our money in our own projects. But we also learned that it's going to be tough to invest at the level that you invest and generate the returns that you generate. So as adults, we would appreciate it if you also gave us the opportunity to invest with you. And I was like, I never looked at it that way. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I was like, okay, well, we can increase our impact by helping other people get wealthy through impact investing with us, because we do it at such a high level. We can help more residents and cities by having more capital and do more impact investing. So it's like, okay, this is, and then I came back to the story of me as a 7-year-old. I'm like, wow, I think this is so weird. I'm
full circle.
Like, this is it, full circle. Wow, let's go, let's do it. So,
yeah, and as you said, like, and opening the door and letting others also come in.
Yeah,
and I can understand kind of your fear of like, no, I want to keep a Chinese wall, and what I do is well for me and for my partner and all this, but not be put in a position where then you could be it could be seen as a conflict.
And I grew up with very old values.
Yeah.
Like for me, a handshake is worth more than anything.
It's a deal.
It's a deal.
Yeah.
My honor and my loyalty are extremely important, and I will always take the hard route to respect my own values and the relationship that I have with people. So taking on outside money for me, I see it as a huge responsibility.
Yeah, the fiduciary responsibility.
It's huge. It's like I'm going to die before
scary.
I put you in a bad position. And I've had some bad partnerships in my businesses in the past. I had to deal with some lawsuits. I was defamed. I was blackmailed. I went through some really wild stuff with some very wild people. And despite that, my reputation has always stayed perfect. Why? Because the amount of value I put on trust and honesty and integrity and ethics. Yeah. Exactly. Old values. So that's also something that I think a lot of people don't consider that enough when they start like talking about raising capital or bringing on partners. The way I say is, hey, if I'm taking you on as a partner or investor, it means that I'm willing to take the bullet for you. And that, I believe, is not it's not prevalent enough in
no, a lot of people want to take the capital, but then they kind of skip the responsibility.
No skin in the game, right?
That come with.
Come back to Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett, 99.9% of his fortune is still invested in Berkshire behind his investors. Yeah. His family is still invested in that, and that's for me. That's okay. That's the way it should be done.
You mentioned quite a few times, the impact that you have.
Right.
And a little while ago, I had talked about on a project I'm working on that's across the street from a university. It's taken a long time because we've had a zoning change.
Right.
It's taken almost 2 years.
It always takes a long time.
And the city and I wanting to contribute some student housing. And there's a university across the street. There's a CEGEP that's about 700 meters away.
Right.
Both institutions lack housing. Some students get refused because they can't be housed. And so I had talked about, the ROI of the project. The ROI is in the return, but also the return on impact.
Right.
And I'm glad that you bring this up as a kind of, I wouldn't say a new variable, because I think for you and I, it's always been embedded in how we look at the projects. But what is the net contribution that we really make to a city? Because it's not just, urbanism I find fascinating. How do cities work? Why is it that in Sherbrooke, downtown used to be the core, and then it become kind of like this poor place kind of run down, and now it's coming back? Like all those dynamics that affect in some way, property value, but why is it that certain cities work better than others?
Yeah.
And not only do I find it fascinating, I'm glad to find you who also has that perspective, that it's also about the net contribution that you make.
For sure. I think number one, like in what you just said, lack of vision is a big problem, and the lack of leadership.
Yeah.
As a society at whole, I think we've lost leadership, and kind of like the values I was talking about, courage and having a backbone and having balls.
Yeah.
I think we've lost that as a society.
And vision.
Right?
And you said it, because so many investors, they just want to renovate. They just want to do this. Or like, what's the optimal use of this land? Yeah, okay, but what drives the biggest impact for the next 50 years on that land?
I always think about, my grandfather fought in World War II, and I was brought up like a Spartan, right? Yeah. Essentially, that's how I was brought up. And I always come back to the thought of, hard times create hard men. Hard men create easy times. Easy times create soft men.
Yeah, weak men.
And I think that's we're kind of victim of that right now in society. And I think that lack of vision, whether it be at the bureaucratic level, whether it be at the political level, especially municipally.
Yeah.
And obviously we could go into provincial and federal politics as well, but
we'll get to that topic.
Yeah, that's another episode.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lack of vision and courage and strength and honor in it. And that's why we have the problems that we have mostly. And I think on the impact investing side, a lot of people use impact investing as kind of like greenwashing. It's like it's pseudo impact investing where it looks good. It makes.
So what would make it better? Is it more affordable? Is it more environmental?
I think impact investing can be many things. You decide what the impact you want to have on people. So obviously, the first thing is that in our case, because of my childhood dreams, it's affordable housing and homelessness.
Yeah.
So everything we do, there's an aspect of affordable housing and homelessness, and creating communities, like you just said, like the whole concept of urbanism. There's another concept it's a branch of urbanism, which is called placemaking, right? Of creating these areas where people get together. If you ever go to Europe is amazing with regards to placemaking, because everything was always built around squares to bring people together. And
La
people,
place du village.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And everyone lives in public, versus here we live enclosed and encapsulated in our huge houses and huge apartments, right? Like a 2-bedroom apartment in Montreal and in Quebec is usually like 1,000 square feet. In Paris, it's maybe 550 square feet or square meters, which would be about 50 square meters, right? So there's that too. And then, trying to reinvest in community and trying to think, how can these investments and developments help this city be a better place on every point? And a lot of people think that either impact investing is kind of like greenwashing and just kind of, putting it out there as marketing, or that it's parallel philanthropy that's going to reduce returns. And the way that I see it, the way that I do it, and our impact investing also impacts our investors who invest with us. So I'm like, hey, if you can generate, say, 15, 20% returns by doing real estate investing, but you can do it with me and not do anything. But on top of that, you will be so proud of how you've made your money, not how much money you've made. Because if you're proud of how you made your money, you probably made a lot, right? It kind of goes together. It's implicit, right? And the way I see it is that impact investing actually generates more returns. It generates alpha, right? Because take the very simple example of, I bought a piece of land, which is about 100,000 square feet. We could put about 280 units on it normally, if we respect zoning laws. Now, through everything that we do, everything that we've shown the city, we go to the city and say, look, we think we should be able to put 900 units on this land. Why? Because if you allow us to do that, this is what we're going to be able to do for families, for elderly people, for homeless people, for the city in general. It's not going to cost you, the city, anything, because whether we do 900 or 200, it doesn't cost you anything.
They actually make a lot more revenue.
You make more revenue from taxes, right? And it gives me the financial power to do a lot more things that I would not have been able to do. So it's a triple win. It's a win-win-win, right? But if we go back down to the mathematical level of real estate development, it essentially allows me as a developer to print money. I can generate thousands of % of return, but then I can also do philanthropic things and still make great returns that are generating alpha. So that's kind of where I think, we need to look at it a bit differently.
So two things, and I want to pivot on this. Thank you for bringing it up. And also because doing 900 versus 250 units on the same piece of land, you also can go to the city and say, let's work together now on public transportation.
Absolutely.
Let's do a ramp.
Infrastructure.
Let's do infrastructure, like all those other variables that some won't take into account. But where I want to get to is that it goes back to what you said earlier, sometimes sadly, the lack of vision.
Right.
And some have it. I believe you and I have it. But at the same time, and I have to be careful when I use my words, sometimes we are more enthusiastic about it than the very own cities that are supposed to receive those developments. And we have to ask for accountability to people who are not elected, who've never invested a dime of their own money, who've never taken a financial risk. And, well, yes, it's hard, but it's also that it slows down everything.
For sure.
And how many times on this podcast have I said, like, to me, the biggest impediment now is actually cities and the different levels of government. And I'd love to hear your perspective. And I know you have to be careful as well because you have a lot in the pipeline in Sherbrooke. And, we're not here to insult anyone. It's just, how do you grade the obstacles that you face when it comes to red tape from those not institution, but those, cities?
Yeah. I don't have to be careful. I'm never careful. I've always said my mind. And I think that's, hate me or love me. That's who I am. I'll always be that way. I'm a bit of a rebel. I think it's important to say things as they are, respectfully, obviously. The way I teach it, like at MREX College, we have a certificate in development, which is specialized on upzoning and all that stuff. And the way I teach it to new real estate investors and developers, or even very advanced developers, because I have a very unique way of developing. Very few people in Quebec and even in North America do what we do. But what I teach them is the city. You have to understand when we talk about the city, especially like in French, la ville, the city does not exist. There are essentially three entities, right? It's a three-headed monster, right? There's the elected part of the city. There's the bureaucratic part of the city, right? The people who are not elected, who also have a lot of power. And then there are also the citizens, right? Like
the people.
We'll call it, like when we talk about them negatively, we'll talk about NIMBYs, right? Because they're the ones who are the most, not in my backyard.
Oh, okay.
Right. They're the ones who are the most vocal.
Yeah.
The silent majority, and then the NIMBYs. Yeah. So that's what the city is. You have to, as a developer, be able to enter a relationship with those three and develop that relationship. And that's why development is so hard, because it's almost, it's funny because a lot of people have often said to me, you should go to politics. Are you going to be like the next mayor or whatnot? I've always been like, me in politics? Yeah. Are you out of your mind? They'll kick me out within a week. I say my mind way too much, right? And I probably get frustrated by it. But I essentially realize that as a developer, I'm a politician. A lot of my work now is politics, right? A lot of, not in the negative sense, but in the positive sense. And it's working with those people and trying to find common ground and translate things, because I think it's a lot of stuff that's just lost in translation. And
because they look at a set of rules, they look at a book, le plan de zonage, le plan d'urbanisme, and you need to fit in that box. Yeah, but if I could do more large dwellings for families, shouldn't you be supporting that?
I do public consultations, even when I don't have to, way before I have to. So before I actually draw up any plans with architects, I've usually already done probably 5 to 6 public consultations on a project. I actually do them even before I acquire the land sometimes. And people are very taken aback by it. Citizens, the city, be it the bureaucrats or the elected officials, because I come to them and I say, look, I have this land, I'm buying it, it's not even bought yet. What do you think I should do with it? Like what do you I have an idea, this is my mission as a company and as a developer. What do you think? What should be done? What shouldn't be done? And most of the times they're like, because this is how we do it differently than most developers, they're like, well, where are the plans? I don't have plans. We're going to draw them up together, right?
As a function of what comes out of this meeting, what is it that you say you need, what the city would like to see, then we'll come up with a coherent vision.
I'm your appendage. I'm your arm. I'm your development arm of the city. I work for you. I serve you, the city, and that's the three heads. And that's a very unique way of looking at things.
You're not used to that.
No, because developers usually are very much, and I don't want to spit on developers, but we're depicted as egocentric megalomaniacs who just want more doors, more money. We're big, fat, monopolistic fat cats.
Who swim in money.
Right. And the ones that, and then there are a lot that have tried to kind of greenwash or whitewash through, I'm benevolent and whatnot. And then you realize that they're not really. So you're kind of fighting against those two trends. I mean, development's not easy, and anyone who thinks that it is, they just shouldn't be a developer. You should be a developer if you are a Spartan. If you are a Spartan, you can be a developer. If not, invest behind a developer, buy apartment buildings, and buy used apartment buildings. Just don't get into that, because it's a whole nother world, essentially.
And it's a lot more capital intensive. It always takes a lot more time.
A lot of patience.
It's a lot of patience. And, I'm glad you used the word vision, because to me, that's, at least personally, that's what's been a huge driver. And our project in Saint-Jérôme, I've looked at that land and I was like, I know exactly what we're going to do. Yeah, it will have taken us almost 4 years, but we're going to do it. We're going to do it. And I'm very proud of it.
And we need people who can do that. Otherwise, nothing will ever get built. And we'll always be in a status quo as a society, as people. And I mean, I don't think that's how the world should work or works.
No. And you brought up a very good point about how to work with cities. And I kind of have a challenge for you, is that we're going to have to wrap it up, because I could continue for another 2 hours, but I want to be respectful of your time. And you have a lot of experience in that. And I would like you to come back on the podcast so we can talk specifically about cities and how to work with cities, because there's so much opportunity for redevelopment and development, and we all need to learn in the industry how to remove some of that friction on how to get those different entities, I was going to say the private sector, the developers, the investors, however you want to call them, and the cities because to make sure that we really come up with the best use of land for everyone,
for sure.
and I mean the community. So it's an invitation.
It would be my pleasure.
You will come back on the show. And if anybody would like to get in touch with you and learn more about what is it that you do, what's the best way to get in touch?
It depends. If you're an investor or developer and you want to learn how to be a better one, whether you're at the beginning, already have 500 units, there's definitely something you can learn with us. So right now it's MREX College, so Collège MREX. We're actually going to be launching our English version of our courses in the upcoming year.
Oh, wonderful.
Right now everything's in French.
Yeah.
So there's that. We produce a lot of content in French. We'll start doing it in English as well. And otherwise, for anyone who's interested in impact investing and joining the vision that we have, I mean, I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn, Facebook.
And you respond.
I respond.
Yeah, you respond.
I try to.
Yeah.
Not always easy, but I try
you respond. That's how we got in touch. And Nikolay, it's been a real pleasure to have you on today. I'm super happy you came. I've been looking forward to this, and I look forward to the next time you're on.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. And I'll be back as much as you want.
Sounds good. Hey, for all those who are listening, as usual, share this episode with a friend who could benefit from this conversation. I say it week after week. Keep researching your market. Make some offers. I'll talk to you next week. Thank you.